welcome from my side. I'm Li Huang. I am a co-curator of this event series. And usually next to my side would be Freya Schwachenwald, who is my better half. But she's not here right now, unfortunately for us, but fortunately for her, because she's starting her fellowship at Stanford University for the next 6 months. But she is, she wants to, greet you guys and have a little introduction to today's topic and send us a video message. So let's look at it.
Hello and welcome to this session of KuK-Tuesdays under the title Dislocation and Object Lives. My name is Freya Schwachenwald, and together with Julie Huang, I am curating this event series. As you can see, I can't be here with you tonight, but I still wanted to send you a warm welcome and give you a little bit of an introduction to tonight's session. So what do we mean by object lives? What we want to do today is to look at the different ideas and meanings that have been attached to objects that came to collections in Germany in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the kind of implications these different meanings these objects have had to the present day. We are specifically talking about the idea of Asian objects, and of course Asian is a very vague and complex term that we're hoping to deconstruct a little bit tonight. But objects that have been somewhat attributed with Asianness over the centuries have been classified under different terms as a curiosity, as an ethnographic item, or as a work of art. And we're going to look at these different meanings, at the ideas of attributed to these objects. And also we're going to look at the relationship between objects and humans, which means what are the experiences of engaging with these objects in collections in the past, but also today, and what are the different approaches to these objects from an art historical perspective, but also from an artistic perspective, and in a way also from an activist perspective. And this is also what we're hoping to do with this event series. We're bringing together scholars, artists, activists, in order to talk about the history of collections, the history of objects, but also what that implies for us as an individual, as a researcher, artist, or activist for our own practice. And so thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm really hoping that you're going to have a great evening and have lively discussions, and please also come again. Thank you very much.
That was Freya. And now I'm very happy to introduce to you our host for tonight, who's on the right-hand side of mine. He's Lukas Fuchsgruber. Lukas Fuchsgruber is an art historian at TU Berlin. His research focuses on digitization in museums, on photo archives, and the history of the art market. His PhD was on the auction market in 19th century Paris, published as Das Spektakel der Auktion in 2020. A subsequent postdoc project dealt with is a very long name, International Association of Museum Officials for Defense Against Forgeries and Improper Business Practices, created in 1898. And since 2020, he's part of the research network Museum and Society, mapping the social with a case study museums and the politics of data. So I'm very happy to have you as host today, Lukas, and I will hand the microphone to you to introduce our panelists.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to, more stuff. I'm really happy to be here. Actually kind of proud because I love this event series, and I was happy to be invited to this particular session about objects life because, as you heard, my background in museum studies and art market studies seems somehow connected. The whole concept, the curation, the selection of the guests is thanks to Lee and Freya. I'm merely here to keep the space and be hopefully a welcoming host. So welcome to all of you. I'm happy that you made it through the snow, and let's have a nice evening together. So the concept for the evening is, I will introduce our two guests. Thanks for coming. Then I will just situate a bit the topic of today in what has happened in the last years here at the Institute, because I thought this could be a way to welcome you, to tell us, to tell you and us what has been happening here, because the term object lives, I think, has changed a lot in the last 10 years, and I will give like a super fast, very, very short, because it's about your work, very, very short overview. But let's first introduce our two guests. So on my right is Emily Theo. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the Gotha Research Center of the University of Erfurt. She's a cultural historian with research interests in Chinese-European cultural interconnections from the early modern period until the 19th century. She completed her PhD at the University of Kent and the Freie Universität Berlin with a dissertation about early modern travel accounts of China. Her scholarship focuses on the historical, cultural, and social processes which informed the widespread practice of collecting Chinese objects in Germany. Currently, she's working on the project Strategies of Collecting and Displaying China in 19th Century Germany, Gotha's Chinese Cabinet, funded by the German Research Foundation. And our other guest is Lisa May Davide. She's a painter and a transdisciplinary artist. She engages with omissions in personal and collective archives through abstract painting, installations, architectural interventions, and collective works. She seeks to undermine the binary oversimplifications of the world by thinking relationally in terms of intersections, turning points, and bifurcations, all while experimenting with forms of activation and disruption. Born in the Philippines, she lives and works in Berlin. She studied at the Academy of Fine Arts Nuremberg and at the Berlin University of the Arts. And current research exhibitions include Narben der Erinnerung in Museum Reinickendorf and Snare for Birds at Ateneo Art Gallery in Quezon City in the Philippines, and in 2023, Prussian Palaces, Colonial Histories, Biographies and Collections at Charlottenburg Palace Berlin, and Transition Exhibition at the Brücke Museum Berlin in 2022. And it was important for me to read all this out to you and also see how the terms around object lives, around collections have really shifted, how the politics of the terminology that we use is maybe different than in the last years. And that's why I'm so happy about the discussion today. And now comes the very short thing that I promised you. Oh no, wrong direction. This direction. So, I've been at TU for a while, and that's why I feel privileged to present a bit the history of object life research. And one maybe turning point was in 2017, the introduction of the project Translocations. It was also introducing terminology, I would say, the translocation of cultural, how did we call it? Cultural assets, assets. This was a term back then. So it was a research cluster, and there were also members in this research cluster thinking about the translocation of, let's say, so-called Asian art, Asian cultural objects, in particular Christine Howald and Ji Young Park, who you see. Okay, no, I will not use the pointer. It makes a weird sound. The result of this year-long project, among many other results, were like a blog, and there were 3 blogs, I guess. And one of them was about the iconography, let's say, about the image of the, let's say, taking, for example. Like, how did European newspapers display this act of power? And 2 printed volumes also came out of this project, and I highlighted some of the chapters by Ji, also about object lives of, again, so-called Asian art. And this is supposed to be 2016. Also in the broader spectrum of this work is the project by Christine Howald, Tracing East Asian Art, and 2 conferences where I'm showing you a bit the program and the terminology that is used there. For example, the power of pricing, the legitimization of Chinese looted art on the European market. So it's about the politics and the economics of loot in this case. And you see again the iconography that is used there, which also continues in the publications of these conferences. And here comes also one special aspect of our institute. We had for many years a Center for Art Market Studies and a journal attached to it. And here I'm showing you 3 issues that also contained open access articles about the translocation of Asian art, of Asian cultural assets. You can find them all online. And then we are almost in the present. I also wanted to use the occasion to show the connection in my research and what I do with students to the topic. This is a project where I got to know Freya Schwachenwald better. We had a seminar together, and together with the students we annotated European paintings on the topic of generating foreignness, to generate otherness. How is, through the depiction of humans, through the depiction of plants, of animals, otherness created in art? My colleague Ronja Baumig at the HU in the same project then went more back to this idea of what we're also talking today, like the lives of objects and how they relate to the lives of people in the city. And she's interviewing people and is currently producing a short film about basically the object lives in the Asian Art Museum in the Humboldt Forum, and how local activist groups, visitors, in their daily life, tourists, everybody relates to these objects emotionally, politically. And then this was in an exhibition that we did on our project last November, and then we are already in the present, because 1 week after the exhibition started this new season of the Dislocation series with this session where actually I think Christine Howald was the moderator. So this was the circle that I wanted to give you, and we are here. So we are in the present. Okay, thanks. I will give now the space to you, Emily, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, and I want to thank the organizers for their invitation to be here this evening. All right, so this is my first slide. My research focus is the history of Asian objects, specifically Chinese objects in European collections from the 17th to the 19th centuries. And my current project explores the collection and display of Chinese objects in Germany during the course of the 19th century. I focus on a very specific collection, and that is a Chinese cabinet in Gotha that was once the largest collection of Chinese objects in continental Europe. However, I think many of the themes that I will talk about today, discussing Asian objects and the display of these collections, will be familiar to anyone working with cultural objects. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh, thank you. My own research is source-based, so I work a lot with the archives to reconstruct the history of collections as well as object biographies. And what do I mean by object biography? And I think this term can be very broad. So object lives can start from the very beginning of the object. I know some people will think production may not even be early enough, but I like to start from the production. So to think about the sites of their makings back in their original context or their home context. And for Asian objects, this would usually be a port city in Asia. Many of these objects were made for export, and so they would quickly have been packed, put onto ships, took a boat ride for an entire year before they ended up in a European port city, perhaps Copenhagen, London, or Amsterdam. And then they were unloaded to the art market, got into the hands of an art dealer who tried to market them as Asian, Chinese, emphasizing their qualities of maybe uniqueness, bizarreness, foreignness, exoticness, anything that could help him sell the object for a profit. Then it would end up in the hands of a collector who had his own purposes for the collection. Sometimes they used it as a form of ethnographic knowledge about a foreign culture. Sometimes it was for their own aesthetic enjoyment, for decoration of their apartments, for many reasons. Until today, some of these objects remain in private collections. Others have ended up in museums where they also have their own lives within the museum collection. And so this is a very complex topic. Just last week, I organized a workshop to discuss the histories of Chinese collections in Europe. And I invited curators, museum practitioners, academics, so people from art history, ethnography, Chinese studies, to look at this topic from a variety of angles. And I think we didn't come to any consensus in terms of methodology, but I would say it was a very rich discussion to think about Chinese collections in different country contexts, in different types of collections, and to think about how we can research the history of these collections. And I think this topic is so rich because let me go back to the previous slide. I think this topic is so rich because Asian objects in European museums are displaced from their historical context on two levels. So firstly, they are displaced from their place of production. Artworks that arrived in early modern Europe were variously given labels such as Oriental, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, and sometimes they were described as ethnographic objects to delineate works from a distant and foreign empire. Secondly, their appearance as isolated objects in glass vitrines today conceals the myriad lives that they have led since their entry into museum collections. So objects that remain in museum collections have been displayed, rearranged, broken, restored, placed in storage, lost, etc. over the years. Today, if you were to go to a museum, you would see that objects are often accompanied with labels that offer viewers important yet perfunctory information about the characteristics and origin of the artwork. These include a name or a description of the artwork, the material, an estimated period of production, sometimes the name of a craftsperson. And origin in this instance is usually referring specifically to a geographical origin. So where was this object made? And this label is akin to a name card. It provides key details about the artwork that helps us to understand it, but it's always a synopsis. So objects remain insufficiently contextualized. We know where it was made, but how did it end up here? What happened between the production of the artwork to the present day? So to illustrate how research into object lives can offer new findings to our understanding of objects and their reception throughout history, I want to give some examples of Asian robes from the collection that I work with. And the collection has several East Asian garments, including the one pictured here on the slide, titled Semi-Official Robe with Depictions of Dragons. So on the digital portal of the museum, you can see this formal information that I mentioned earlier. And there's also an accompanying text that offers a formal analysis of the robe. It explores the colors, material, technique, texture, and shape of the garment, the symbolic meanings behind the dragons, storks, bats, clouds embroidered on the robe. And this gives the viewer important initial information about its significance and function. But why was the collector interested in this object? And how did it arrive in Germany? How was it displayed upon its arrival in a German palace? And so I suggest that archival material, historical sources can be very important for understanding these object lives more fully. So in the process of researching archival sources, it quickly becomes clear that historical collectors interpreted these objects very differently from museums today. Such robes, like the one earlier, would have been worn in the Chinese emperor's court and were popular with Chinese collectors since these garments were representative of the quality of Chinese silks and the skill of craftspeople. Furthermore, they were clear signifiers of Chinese arts and culture through embroidered symbols. And the first aristocratic collector, Duke August, he placed great value on East Asian clothing. So he would sometimes import clothes as well as life-sized East Asian dolls with costumes. And then he would embark on a very careful visual analysis of these clothes. He would inform his acquaintances about his purchases, and these include the anthropologist Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. And he would even suggest, like, let me send you sketches of these clothings, or I can make an imitation for you so you would have it and you could keep it in your cabinet as a kind of object of knowledge about a foreign culture. And so to him, these objects were highly prestigious, having come directly from China, and he served as an authentic image of Chinese dress and craftsmanship. Following the collector's death, his private collection was dissolved and it became a museum collection. And as with museums throughout Germany, it was open to the public. And this led to a new configuration of the objects. And this time, the curator was very interested in using these objects as also as an ethnographic object, and to illustrate travel texts circulating in that time about Chinese clothing. So this text is kind of like a museum catalog / travel log, which is an interesting combination. And he would use the robe, like the one we saw earlier, to illustrate that Chinese fashions are unchanging, or like adults of standing would typically wear this dark blue silk with embroideries of gold and silk, and dragons are featured prominently. I want to share with you a quite remarkable archival document that I was surprised to find. It's called the Diary of the Ducal Art and Chinese Cabinet from 1857. And this records how the curators and how visitors kind of received the objects in day-to-day life. So it tells us a little bit about the reception history. And this document gives interesting information about how fragile objects, such as robes, were conserved. They were put behind glass vitrines, and they were carefully cared for so that they wouldn't become infested with moth damage. So there would be someone who, from time to time, would apply a solution onto them to make sure that they were kept in good shape so that visitors could still see them, and that they couldn't be touched. What was surprising to me, however, was that visitors did not always kind of adhere to the narrative that was being put out by the curator and had their own ideas about how to view these objects. One example I want to give is from the Englishman Samuel Brown, who visited the Gotha collection on September 14, 1857. And Buber observed that Mr. Samuel Brown from London visited the Chinese cabinet. Upon casting a look at the East Indian clothing, he mentioned with a sad voice that his brother and English officer, along with his wife and children, had perished in East India, for he had not received any news from them till now. The final image I want to share of this robe is a watercolor by the court painter Heinrich Justus Schneider, who created an album documenting the key departments of the Ducal Museum in Gotha on the occasion of its inauguration in 1879. And by this time, all the collections in the palace had been united under one roof, and this was their ethnographic cabinet. The East Asian art collection was rearranged and formed part of this cabinet. And in his selection of the most prestigious object, one sees again the East Asian robes, and this time they have been arranged in the form of an anthropological diorama in a scene that you find throughout ethnographic museums in Germany in the late 19th century. So to conclude, And thinking about the object lives of the Asian robes, I would say it's impossible to document the provenances of objects and their object lives exhaustively, from the point of making until their current locales in museums. However, I want to say that there is often sufficient evidence to recover key moments in an object's history, and insights into object lives can often be surprising. Objects located in different museums with different interpretations and framings could have once been part of the same collection. And through object biographies and historical research, one can arrive at a fuller understanding of human engagement with Asian objects, including how collectors in the past ascribed changing values and interpretations to the same artworks over time. And this critical engagement is particularly relevant for transcultural objects. This challenges the concept of an Asian object as a single, isolated piece or as a straightforward signifier of a foreign culture. Instead, East Asian objects in European collections are embedded in a web of constellations, relations, and interpretations, and have rich histories in their sites of production, as well as in their current contexts that are waiting to be explored. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the plan is we directly continue with the next presentation, but I will take the privilege of just saying thank you more specifically, because I think it's so exciting to see how museums can be approached. Like, where do you go when you do like an object biography? And this diary, I will have many more questions later on this diary, but just to say, to go to these diaries and to look at what the people thought, and then maybe I was thinking of the other thing of the short film of my colleague, to compare it with what people are saying today and so on. So I'm already very, very excited. And I wanted to say that both of you enter the museums like as some kind of outsider, insider, because you work with them, with the collections, about them, and so on. So now we come to the second presentation about how, you as an artist basically enter similar spaces. Yeah, so thanks. I'm looking forward to your presentation as well.
Yes, thank you for introducing and inviting. I'm also glad to be here and also having a conversation with you afterwards. And I am now, this is the first image. As mentioned, I am here taking the position of an artist and also painter. And I am specifically not talking about the 18th and 19th century, because I am influenced by modernist shapes and abstract paintings. And I would also say to frame myself in the context of Germany and being a post-migrant and being part of the Filipino diaspora. And my question is, can I use the canvas as an ambivalent epistemic device to express positionality, subjectivity, and complicity through its links to the canon, whatever it means, speculation and value? And how can I work with it as a membrane which resonates to issues of memory, loss, and cultural heritage, especially in these difficult times today? I start with Artists Unknown. This is a project I made 2014 in the Cultural Center of the Philippines. I was interested in what art history means from the perspective of Southeast Asia, and how institutions were working with this kind of like beginning fashion of art archives. I was also looking at institutional structures and connections between my own art education in post-war West Germany in the 2000s. And I was focusing on 43 out of 1,000 artworks from their collection, which were labeled as Artists Unknown. In this tarpaulin installation, I have to do this one here. In this tarpaulin on the right side, it's an installation. I chose the documentation of 3 L-shaped objects without any further descriptions and referred it to the architecture. 4 years later, in 2018, during the exhibition in Hamburger Bahnhof in Berlin called Hello World, Revising a Collection, I decided to reproduce these gray unknown objects during a workshop performance and transported them to a Western European context and observe what will happen. During the preparation, I was advised to contact the Judy Freya Sibayan in the Philippines to ask her if she knows the creators behind the L-shaped forms, as she was working there as a curator during the 70s. At first, she did not recognize these works, but an hour later, she actually responded again, and it turned out that they were made by herself during the first exhibition called Untitled Painting No. 1 and Other Paintings in the year 1974. And coincidentally, she was even currently working on her own inventory as conceptual artist and was activating her own works during a performance on the very same day. The projects, or the next project, Flowers Beneath Our Feet, was a collaboration with Mexican artist Gabriel Rosel Santillan and Keiko Kimoto. It was commissioned by the Transition exhibition at the Brücke Museum Kunsthaus Dahlem in 2021 to 2022, and where we first encountered the collection of Carl Schmidt-Rottluff. As a sketch, I made this kind of collage on the left side with Rottluff's photography of his studio, where his collection was displayed on the wall and on the floor, and I exchanged with the objects from my private collection of my parents, with whom I grew up with in northeast Bavaria city called Hof. They both met in Nigeria in the 80s, and during the time where my mom was one of the migrant workers teaching English. During the lockdown, Gabriel, Keiko, and me were drawing on a series of large drawings transferred to a tapestry. One motif on the right side, you can see a wooden shield I recognized from the Philippines, although it was labeled from Papua New Guinea. So I double-checked with experts. So this was a visit in the archive. This is the Luzon shield I immediately recognize. So especially helpful was that I was already connected with the network of the Mapping Philippine Material Culture, initiated by Cristina Juan and curator Marian Pastor Rojas, linked to the SOAS University in London. There it was easy to see that the shield was from the Philippines. As the Brücke Museum was filling in the Carl Schmidt-Rottluff collection into a Wikicommons database, it was also interesting for me that this correction was just added as an information to the wiki database of the museum instead of erasing it. So you can see like Igorot region, Philippines was added, and then Papua New Guinea, etc. So for me it was like, but this is a correction, and I was not used to that, and yeah, it was interesting. Another motif I chose was a Rafflesia leonardi, this plant. A plant is listed as endangered in the Philippines. It was named after the botanist Leonardo Coe, who was killed during his field work in the forest by assumingly military groups. And the killing itself is still unresolved until now. Another Rafflesia I encountered when looking into collection of the Völkerkunde Museum in Dresden. Also in the right, you can see that Leonardo Rafflesia, and in the left down, I encountered the Rafflesia schadenbergiana. Alexander Schadenberg was a German chemist and ethnographer who stayed with his family and traveled around the Philippines for almost 30 years and died in 1896 in the Philippines. I encountered Alexander Schadenberg for the first time through an image of the Mayon volcano, which reminded me of my family album, which I brought from the Philippines when I was small. That's my mom on the right side and me. So I visited the collection following this thread, and a whole world of networks opened where Schadenberg was involved in. As I am actually more interested in painting, I also found this Mayon volcano. So this is during the visit of this picture. I also found this Mayon volcano painting in Leibniz Institute for Länderkunde in Leipzig, specialized in geography, painted by Ernst Vollbeer. After checking him on the internet, it says that he was a traveler, a painter, and passionate about National Socialism and colonialism, and working directly with Hitler himself. Snare for Birds. In June 2020, my artist colleague Kiri Dalena, a filmmaker and activist based in Manila, Philippines, was invited by the Rautenstrauch-Joest Museum to respond to 3,787 colonial photographies referring to the Philippines. Her digital residency happened during the exhibition Resist, the Art of Resistance. They were bought by the German merchant Georg Küpperslosen in 1913. Before the pandemic, Kiri and me actually met in a photography exhibition where in the Philippines called Not Visual Noise, where we both exhibited our works in November 2019. There, I was working with the images from a photo album of my German stepfather Günther Eckhardt, who was traveling to the Philippines himself, Taiwan and Japan as a part of a photographer delegation invited by the Japanese company Osawa in the 70s. Sending these pictures from Germany back to the Philippines, where they were taken 42 years ago, was for me a gesture of bringing back what was taken there. But because Kiri was overwhelmed by the heaviness of the RGM collection, she asked me in Berlin and Jacqueline Reyes in New York to collaborate. In the context of these, for me, overwhelming material, especially during the pandemic, I refused to reproduce the photography and chose painting. This is the Snare for Birds, and it shows painting under the label of artistic freedom, questioning what colors do archives have? Can I translate emotions triggered in the spaces of museum into colors? I felt resistance against research itself because of the embedded structural violence speaking through these corridors and storages. So what I did is feel into my body and just breathe. During one of the visits to the depot, I was taking measurements of the space and selected a fragment and filled this fragment with an intuitive color. The title of this work is Negative Space from 2021. Our conversation continued until now and turned into a series of events in the Philippines, where we brought back printouts of the images to 3 places where they were taken. In Capiz, Visayas, the Philippines, in La Union, Luzon, and in Manila, supported by the curators Marika Constantino and Iris Ferrer. So this one is, this is from one of the first exhibition. And we also made a workshop, and Sieden workshop, 2 days workshop, and artist talks. and the final exhibition in Manila. This one is again the picture on the left is from the from the Hasenkamp archive, where the photographies were stored from Rautenstrauch Youth Museum, and these are the measurements of the painting are the same measurements of the storage. So as the last work, I'm showing you the painting Whose Tears, a homage to Fred Wilson, which served as an artistic intervention during the exhibition Prussian Palaces, Colonial Histories in the Charlottenburg Palace in 2023. So I was looking into the shelves of the porcelain and also experimented with the space around them. For example, also scanning this allegoric figure representing Europe, Asia, America, and Africa. So additionally to the painting, I also had these postcards here on the left side. You can see like, so I composed this color, which is from different shades of like during some workshops, and I thought like it was a mixture between red of rage and bluish melancholy, subjective interpretations of colors, and on it it's like the drops inspired by Fred Wilson's work. And I will just read what it is like behind of the postcards. The depicted drops of the paint surface refer to the work of artist Fred Wilson, 1954. Already in the exhibition Mining the Museum in 1992 at the Maryland Historical Society, USA, Wilson worked with the museum's collection to question historical narratives representing the Western canon. Here in Germany, museums' critical engagement with their collection is still in its infancy. So my question was, the question of the museum actually, why does the artist ask for whose tears when it comes to colonial history in German museums? So there were a lot of like answers I am still waiting to get. And in this other one, this was the second draft, and it's I wanted even to make this connection into the 90s. So the depicted 3 sunflowers with the outlined building refer to an example of racist violence in Germany, the pogrom in Rostock-Lichtenhagen in 1992. Is there even a continuity between the porcelain figures from the 18th century and racist violence in Germany in the early 90s? That's my question.
Thank you so much. I tried to introduce this whole thing by telling the history of object lives, and I'm happy for both of your talks. Like I really feel now we're in the present, and now we're in the present discussion. So I'm really looking forward to now be able to hear a bit more about both your works. So the plan is that we have a conversation now, and then afterwards, of course, you also will have time to ask your questions. But for now, please write down your questions and don't lose them. And later it's your turn. But maybe I want to start with the end, this reference to Wilson's work. So I guess it's very much about confronting the museum as a space, like introducing irritation. You also used the term disruption. And I remember like reading about Wilson's work that it also resulted in a lot of anger by museum visitors. Like he had this, I think he had this baby cradle with a little loudspeaker, and people always tried to push over the baby cradle because they were so angry that somebody disrupts the museum. And you said you're still waiting for the postcards, but so far, can you already say if there has been anger? And did you notice anger?
Yeah, I can remember that there was a notice that there's absolutely no connection. And I was wondering, so I'm actually currently observing what does it needs to make connection. And so that the anger maybe is like more expressing that there's not. Yeah, there's no connection at all. And so when I talk about these issues with people, then they say, why do you connect these things? So, and then like the vehement of like saying no is like for me the expression of this anger.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe Emily, I wanted to ask you, so while I was listening, I was, like I said, immediately fascinated by your sources, like immediately shifting the gaze from the object towards the visitor. It makes so much sense, of course, for me as a critical perspective. And at the same time, I was thinking the quote that you gave was like a collector, or like and I have the feeling I'm still in a very limited world, like a leader, let's say also a male leader, and then like a male expert visitor, and so on. So I'm trying to understand what are like the biggest gaps you see in the documentation you're working with, because I guess they jump at you. So I was like curious what your perspective is on these sources, and how do they represent like what is missing there, or what is your perspective?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And very aptly observed that it is still kind of a view of an expert or a white male visitor. And I think this is just the way, just the historical circumstances of who used to visit museums in the 19th century. I haven't really carried out really quantitative research into how many men and how many women. I know someone who did that with Dutch museums, and one thing that surprised me, he said, usually it was groups of men who visited the museum, or men on their own, a man and a woman. The group that you never find is single women or a single woman or small groups of women. So I think definitely the history of museum is that it attracts a certain kind of visitor. The museum was promoted in guidebooks for English travelers in Germany. So this already precludes people who were too poor to travel, people probably with a lack of resources to get around Germany. I think in terms of social economic classes, status, like sometimes you do get a rare instance of a farmer or a villager from the next village who comes to view the collection and makes a remark. One that stuck with me was that a farmer or a villager from another village, so probably illiterate, he came and he saw the object that was a Chinese bird cage, and his remark was that he was really interested in the bird cage, and then his remark was that now I know that the Chinese have hearts because they take care of birds. Which is in its own sense also like a questionable, like maybe a comment we wouldn't make these days. So what I want to say is that the social economic class was not very varied, as you have observed, and also in terms of gaps, I think there are many. Like not all objects will be fully documented, and there's of course a bias towards people who are more prestigious. So researchers from other institutions, maybe the director of the botanical gardens from Munich. So yeah, there are many gaps, but I think this is kind of everyday research for a historian. It's like you will always have gaps, and then you will think about how to address these gaps, and then work with the sources that are available.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, nevertheless, it is a very interesting anecdote with the like from a class perspective to say that the visitor immediately was undermining basically the display strategy and saying, oh, it's people like us having birds in cages. Yeah, interesting. Because maybe my next question for both of you would be, we in the announcement of the event and also in our discussions before, we were reflecting a bit on this term of Asianness. Like as a framework even in which you have to enter with your work, with your research questions. So a lot is given. Let's say if the museum is called a museum of Asian art, there's a lot of framework already given. So and I wanted just to know really from your practice also, how does this terminology, this framing affect your work? Like, how do you deal with this, or what are you trying to, how do you answer this challenge to be put in this framework of, okay, here's this collection of Asian objects, please work with it, if you know it. I mean, it's a super big question. You can make it as small as you want in your answer. It's just, I feel it is important to pick this up again from our discussions.
I think for my example, what was interesting is that it's no longer a museum of Asian art. So in the 19th century, it was promoted as a museum of Chinese art, and then they would always compare themselves to Dresden or to Altenburg and think like, oh, how can we make ourselves different or unique? And this is to think about how museums position themselves in relation to one another. But today it's seen as a palace museum, and that brings with itself its own framework of how the museum is remembered. So at the very forefront is the ducal family, and most of the research surrounds this history of this particular collection. So I think that even this definition of ethnographic museum or Asian museum, it's interesting to see how that changes from the 19th to 20th centuries.
Thanks. I would say I actually never worked explicitly with the Asian collection in the sense. I also find it, because I refuse in the sense of like having this label, and I see it's like so, as you mentioned, it's like so, it's a big question, and the region is like so different, and it's like, for me, what is interesting is actually how can we imagine, or like first like the imagination of like Asianness depicted in like images or like porcelain figures, and second is also the use of this term maybe today and from more like an activist perspective to encounter or like to get more understanding for like anti-colonial networks, and how can we reinforce these connections in the region of like Asianness, whatever it means, like North, South, Southeast Asian, West, and come into kind of like diasporic demands of what can we do from the diaspora with it, and to make it useful actually.
And you said that, or the postcard said, so it was like it was your words, right? That there's a certain infancy in Germany related to these topics, and now you mention, of course, the need for connection. What would you say, like, how did we even come to the infancy? I mean, at least we are in the infancy, so how did this come into place? Like, what were central factors that now we witness this, that it's happening?
I think the question was actually written by the museum, and then, or also in the dialogue. Infancy, I would say, because if you compare it, like I referred to US, and I was like trying to, is it good to refer to the US in the context of the whole Schloss Charlottenburg exhibition, because I felt I was invited, also part of like the Asian community, and then and so what does it mean? So in the end, from my like collective ancestry trauma, it's not I talk from a specific solidarity when it comes to like issues of slavery. In this sense, I actually feel that that Germany is like behind when it comes also to artistic practices. Mm-hmm. So this is maybe more explicitly what I refer to.
Yeah, thanks for explaining it. Yeah, makes it much more clear. Yeah, thanks. So maybe to both of you, still, I guess you're describing your own practices and how you succeed in making things visible or generating disruptions or putting like a research focus, for example, on the visitors or on the space in your case. And still there's this idea very often, I think, of a double bind. We're coming with research money from a German research institution, and certain things come with it, certain ways to communicate results, certain ways to formulate questions, certain ways to formulate applications. It all comes with it. Or I guess even in the freedom of an artistic intervention, there comes like a pre-formulated idea of what is art and what is art not, and how much maybe modifications you're allowed to make to that space, to give a practical example. So I was wondering, and it's a very open question, and maybe it's too big, I will try to keep them smaller. It's how do you deal with this double bind? And again, feel free to answer as specific as you want, but I guess it is there, and I would be so interested to hear from your practice, how do you deal with this double bind to do in these institutions this kind of work, and dealing with institutional settings, academic preconditions, artistic preconditions. Is it clear?
Yeah, it's clear. I think I might need a bit more time to think about it, but yeah. Do you have an answer already?
I am totally trapped in a double bind, and I feel that this is a question. There is a new publication came out recently, and there are some I don't know, Maria Castro Vera, and it's titled Double Bind, but I haven't read it yet. So I'm referring to this book in the hope I will read it soon, and then I can answer. but I think this is that's why I'm working with a painting, because it is like so embedded in this history of. I'm really in this art historian context now. This is I am actually very glad to be here because I never had a talk in art historian context, although I'm working with art history somehow, more or less, and painting in its like the dimension of panel painting, referring the Western European, like the whole complicity of like this gaze landscape painting, where it comes from, the whole perspective, and when ending also with Europe of this kind of like making these hierarchies of this woman standing in the middle. I feel like the solution to use painting in its problematic is actually the expression of where I feel my body is like complicit in as a double bind, I would say.
Yeah, and now that I have had a bit more time to think about it, so I think that is also the nature of production and also being in a particular discipline. There are sometimes specific expectations or theories that you always go back to and reproduce in your publications or in your findings. At the same time, I find that sometimes research is also very surprising in the sense that working with the objects themselves or working with the institutions or with the sources, they sometimes throw up new questions that kind of challenge you to think about all these truths or these theories that you went in with. So I would say that is like one way to think about it. So to look at what is available from the sources or the material, and then to question these disciplinary boundaries or expectations that you had going in.
And maybe to follow up on this, your work, for me, you said now to encounter the objects, but it seems also to be a lot about to encounter the archive of the museum itself. right? So the diary is also kept in the museum. Did I get it correctly? Or so what I'm trying to understand is what role this archive of the museum plays, and are there other archives? Do you have to read across archives? So the role of the archive, I would like to understand better, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great question, and so the archives can also be a bit quite straightforward in the sense that many are in Gotha, so either next door or a few steps away from where the collections are kept, so in the state archives there, or in the archives of the palace of the museum. And the thing with the politics of the archives, so public archives like state archives, they're usually more open. Anyone can access them with an appointment. It's easy to get information about it. This is not always the case for museum archives, particularly if they don't have the standard archival facilities where they don't have an archivist sitting there that you can to kind of spend time with you, bring your order to you. About the diary, this was kind of surprising. It was found this was in Weimar, and I didn't expect to find it there, but then I think this is just also the surprising places where documents can go. The archivist in Weimar told me they bought it it was bought in the 1930s from a book dealer in Altenburg. So I guess sometimes these things did not make it into the institutional archives. They followed the curator and the owner. It was probably part of his Nachlass when he died, and his family sold it to the book dealer. So sometimes it's surprising, yeah.
Okay, wow, amazing. So I wanted to go a bit in the direction of decentering archives, maybe, but you already answered it, basically. Maybe, Lisa, I would also be interested. You showed us this, let's say, confronting museums, collections with personal archives. Could you say more about the role of archives in your work? Is there also other archives, like movement archives, or that also play an important role in decentering the, let's say, the museum archive?
Yeah, when we kind of, during the pandemic, we had a possibility to find, to connect more within like the Filipino diaspora. So that's also where Dr. Rosa Cardiero Castillo from the Humboldt University and also Yasmin and like some other helpers also were kind of like interested to engage with like Philippine material culture in German collections. So we, from our own initiative, we started like to contact, but we had actually no resources. But it was like a dialogue which started there, but led to again other projects. So as for now, I'm just like trying to address that it's kind of important, like to have like self-organization groups, and like to connect with like own like biographies, or how. I think the question is who's the audience when it comes to the objects. And so for us, we have like an Instagram group called Engaging Colonial Archives. So I'm kind of like observing like activities happening there, specifically when in German collections. So as an artist, I found it was like the very first time that to understand how power is inscribed in this collection. So I think my role of artists are to kind of look from the outside into this kind of like structures of power. And luckily, if it's possible to create critical artworks. And so again, there is the problem of like the fundings where you get them, and then how do you relate or refuse them, what is happening in current situations. And then in our sense, or in my sense, I think I actively use the painting also to kind of develop like a sustainable model to continue like research for the community and providing alternative like fundings for maybe using the art market for a sustainable, infrastructure. I don't know if it works. So this is maybe more a question.
Yeah, and I would be very, very curious to know more. So as a model, so you're thinking of like cooperative structures that are then trying to organize funds through the value that is produced through these interventions. Like maybe you can help me to unpack it. So you generate. So the museum commissions you to make an intervention into their depot, and you get to keep the work, which is of course interesting and valuable. So this makes it possible to do this community cooperative economy. Did I get it?
Yes, it goes in this direction. So it's more like a trial and error thing, and I would say it is a very subversive, it's more like a parasitäre Einpflanzung, so parasitic intervention in the sense of, trying out what happens and also just put your body in the situation. And I have always the feeling during the last years that it is super important, like to be there as a brown body, like being in these places of power, although I don't understand what's actually going on, but just trying to observe, and then and being there also already like formulates and shifts and like this power. And so this is the first step actually already, and just only to hold this place is already a lot of effort and a lot of energies. So I need like to raise and also to find alternative ways to sustain this place and to stay here, because I can easily go away. And so this is a form of resistance. I think it needs to take place.
Thanks so much. I guess at this point, maybe you all can understand why I was so excited about this conversation, because we're really learning about current struggles, current conflicts, how to build institutions, how to work in institutions, how to cross the archives. Maybe, Emily, I also wanted to ask you, we had this conversation about being inside a museum, outside a museum, and so you come from the outside, you work on the inside with the archives, you have access, you can make your case studies. How do you feel in this current debate about the social role of museums? They have to do this work to confront their own past. And it goes in this direction. But how do you see? What do you witness basically in your work about the politics of the museum? What are the kind of it's always hard to say like what is the politics of the work, but I'm trying to say. So you're funded by the German Research Foundation, so you have this kind of liberty to structure your project and your research question, but how do you see it relate to museums investigating their own past, facing their own past, and maybe building a future?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and a lot of points to unpack there. And I think the first part of your question was this insider, outsider, so how to work in collections, with collections. And I think for museums, it is, of course, interesting for them to know as much about their collections as possible. This goes into the entire goals of understanding as much about their provenance, where their objects come from, how their objects were historically displayed. And it makes sense to have researchers to either hired directly by the museums or from outside who are interested in these questions to work with the collections. I think the reality is that I think everyone knows that this is desirable to have as much research as possible to know or a lot. I think the realities with in terms of funding, manpower, and also questions of access. Just the way museums are structured can make it more difficult for such research to be fully carried out. And so that's my answer to your first question. I'm sorry, your second question, could you just briefly repeat it again?
Maybe the bigger scope of how museums actively try to reformulate their purpose, like being spaces of democratic exchange, of community participation and so on. Do you see how, maybe not how you relate it, but how they maybe relate your work? Do they welcome your work in this kind of politics of we want to make the space more accessible, we want to question our past, we want to question maybe imperial pasts? I mean, there are the palace museums, so I'm really curious how they relate to this.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, and I think one good thing about doing research is that you work directly with the people who are so working inside the institution and may have and will have considerable power or considerable insights about the research agenda in the future. And so certainly I hope that some of the issues raised about reception, to question these categories such as Chinese or Asian, to rethink how to approach the collections, I do hope that they will have an impact.
Thanks. Yes, thanks so much. No, I really hope you both have like a really strong impact on these museums. That's why, I'm really. That's why we're having this conversation. Also, yes, thanks so much. Maybe one last question before we involve all of you. So this maybe would be if I think of the previous seasons of this very event series, very often it was about, okay, our work is our work as researchers, as activists, as artists, is directly connected to the question of restitution, of reparation and restitution, of giving back objects and of paying reparations for the damage done. And we didn't touch this topic today, and I wanted to ask why, basically. Because I'm like really curious, because in the context of African art, like we always make like Asian art, African art, like the terms we have to use somehow because the museums use them. Very quickly, it's about restitution. The demands are there. The research is being done. It's very clear. And today, we talked about something else. We talked about objects' lives, and about object biographies, maybe also. And they seem to end in the museum. And I was just curious if you see a difference, why we didn't touch this topic, or maybe should we touch it now? Yeah, I would be curious to hear.
I think we did touch it a little bit because the question was also of return, and when I showed like the project Snare for Birds, and so it's when I talk with like scientists and professionals in the Philippines, it's more about like digital repatriation, which is what is interesting, but it is, of course, the more critical minds is, of course, it needs to be done. Like it is pretty logic, or like it's a pressuring thing that it's important to talk about restitution as well. So it really depends on where and who, and it already when we had like the workshop like in Capiz, and in La Union specifically, and it was more where we actually felt that it makes sense to do that because of the dialogues happening in the workshop, and so it kind of like transformed. So we're like seeing that this is the moment where, for me, the archives are being like that it has this transformative power. And to actually like gain this like awareness of how the colonial continuities like are going through the history of like Spanish colonization, US occupation and like police violence and happening in the Philippines. So this is so important, like that's why it's so important to bring it back, and that's why the audience is in the Philippines when it comes to like this colonial photography. Or of course we can do also like educational activities here in the diaspora. But this is the moment where I guess I could encounter the question of restitution somehow. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I think the question of restitution sometimes also depends on the particular historical moment that objects were acquired, and also the ways in which they acquired. So sometimes objects were largely acquired on the art market, but then I guess there's probably also a big question about restitution in those contexts as well. As far as, and I'm not familiar with the objects having come from a colonial context, so from either the raids of the Summer Palace in the 1850s or the Boxer wars of the 1900s. But of course, I think this is, it also has to do with museums confronting their past. So sometimes these things become uncovered as museums go to their archives and they go through the different labels. Sometimes they do find that, oh, under this collection that we thought was all acquired from the art market, we might find looted goods within. So I think that's one question about restitution. And then I also think like of course there's the repatriation of the objects, and then also the well, kind of re-questioning the narrative, and I think critically examining, so what Asian or what these labels mean. I think that's also, like, by reclaiming the narrative, that's also a form of repatriation.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I hope this was very interesting. Thanks to you both already for this first part. And yeah, as I said, we arrived in a certain present that is highly conflictual, political, and so on. And yeah, I hope that the others share this view, that this was kind of a dialogue on this urgency. And yeah, I thank you so much for being here and for sharing your work. And if you can, please stay and have a wine with us. And yeah, and thanks to you also for listening through all this and bringing your questions, and see you at the wine. Yes. And the last word, of course, goes to the curator of the series.
Thank you. I didn't want to steal your last word, but I want to invite you to the next session, and it fits pretty well to this image on the right of the Sunflower House in Rostock-Lichtenhagen. The next session is about the Vietnamese diaspora in Germany, especially about dislocation and remembrance. And we are talking about the layers of Vietnamese history, and the interconnection between individual family histories and big, great historical events. And the confirmed speakers are, and I'm very excited about them both, Hui Fa. She is a journalist and an author of a novel which is called Wo auch immer ihr seid, Wherever You Are, a great book, please read it. And Mai Tu Bui, an artist who exhibited in the last Berlin Biennial with the work Matot Memory Box. And the whole panel will be moderated by me, so it will be the first time for me moderating, so if you want to see how it goes, please come. And thank you, and have some wine and snacks, and have a nice evening.